Good morning, everyone, and thank you for joining us for today's briefing on the crisis in Darfur and Eastern Chad. My name is Hardin, and I serve as Vice President for Programs and Policy here at Refugees International. The war in Sudan has entered a new and devastating phase. More than 2 years into the conflict, we are witnessing a dramatic escalation in humanitarian need. This is now the world's largest and fastest growing displacement crisis and hunger crisis. Over 13 million people have been forced from their homes, and 4 million of them have had to flee across borders. More than half of Sudan's population urgently needs assistance just to survive. The most recent food insecurity assessments conducted months ago identified 5 areas of risk of famine inside of Sudan. Since then, conditions have only gotten worse. The Sudanese armed forces have retaken parts of Khartoum and other key areas. Meanwhile, the Rapid Support Forces have intensified attacks on SAF-controlled enclaves inside of Darfur. Reports from the ground indicate hundreds of thousands of people have been newly displaced in recent weeks, and thousands more are fleeing every day into neighboring Chad. There, they are only encountering overwhelmed camps, desperate conditions, and declining aid levels. The humanitarian collapse has been sharply exacerbated by the U.S. government's recent decision to slash funding for aid programs. These cuts have left relief agencies without resources needed to respond. Programs have been suspended or drastically scaled back across Eastern Chad and inside of Sudan itself. In some areas, life-saving assistance has ground to a halt almost entirely, leaving displaced families to survive literally on their own. The violence has reached levels not seen since the genocide in Darfur 2 decades ago. In his confirmation hearing only a few months ago, Secretary of State Marco Rubio referred to the situation in Darfur as a real genocide, echoing the declaration of the Biden administration. The need for action is urgent. We must search humanitarian assistance and apply diplomatic pressure to halt the atrocities. President Trump's trip to the Middle East this week offers an important opportunity to make progress on the crisis. We are fortunate to be joined today by individuals who bring firsthand insight from the ground, as well as deep expertise on Sudan, broader region, and U.S. policy. Together, they will help us understand what is happening and explore possible paths forward. Tom Perriello is the former U.S. Special Envoy for Sudan under the Biden administration and previously served as Special Envoy to the African Great Lakes under President Obama. He's also a former member of Congress from Virginia's 5th District. Hanin Ahmed is a Sudanese activist and a leader in Sudan's emergency response rooms, which recently received the European Parliament's Sakharov Prize and the Richard C. Holbrooke Award from Refugees International. She previously served as the Secretary General of the African Union Youth Assembly. Mohamad Yahia is a volunteer with the ERRs, and he is joining us today from Darfur to share his perspective from the ground. Andrea Tracy is Vice President of Proximity to Humanity and an expert in humanitarian assistance and political transitions. She has over 2 decades of field experience with bilateral and multilateral aid agencies in some of the toughest crises in the world. And finally, Dan Sullivan is Director of Africa, Asia, and Middle East at Refugees International. He leads our work on Sudan and has been on the ground in Chad, Egypt, South Sudan, and inside Sudan in recent months. He brings more than 20 years of experience in foreign policy and human rights to the table. Welcome all. Before we begin, a quick note. Today's event is on the record, and I'll start by posing a few questions to our panelists. We expect the moderated discussion to last for about 40 minutes, followed by an open Q&A. If you'd like to ask a question, please use the Q&A function at the bottom of your Zoom screen. Hanin, can I turn to you first? Al-Fashir and in Zamzam displacement camp in Darfur, both are under siege by the RSF. What do conditions look like there, and what should we anticipate going forward?
Thank you. Good morning, everyone. Thanks for the Refugees International to give us this platform to show or to reflect the situation from the ground. Actually, the situation is horrible after the RSF took Zamzam. And colleagues in Al-Fashir told me that Fashir is not fall down by the attacks, it will fall down by the starvation on the ground because everything become very expensive and there is a huge wave of looting and attacking on the civilians. So it become very hard on them to buy the basic needs. And it's better to hear from my colleague Mohamad that because he's there and he's following the situation on the ground. محمد، سامعني يا محمد؟ جمهور.
You're on mute, Mohammed.
يا جمهور لو ممكن تدينا يعني وصف عن الوضع الحالي حاصل في الأرض في زمزم وفي الفاشر، وكيف النازحين والوضع عندكم في الطينة وزي ما قلت لك زمزم والفاشر.
سلامات للجميع، كيفكم؟ إن شاء الله عارفين. أول حاجة الحاصل في الأرض وفد أحداث معسكر زمزم. الحاصل في الأرض مؤسف جدا. طبعا لحد هسي في تينا وصل أكثر من 36,000 نازي أو لاجئ
دقيقة يا محمد،
في
دقيقة.
محلية.
So
تفضل.
he's greeting everyone, and he said the situation on the ground is horrible and they can't hold anything. They get on received more than 36,000 displacement person from Zamzam to Altinaa due to the recent attack on Zamzam camp. ممكن تواصل يا محمد.
الواقع في الأرض يعني على حسب طبعا الفاشر له زمزم، والفاشر والمعسكرات اللي حول الفاشر له أكثر من سنة ونص يتعرض للغزف والحصار من قبل قوات الدعم السريع. والحصار ده خلف وراه ضريبة كبيرة جدا للمواطنين، أدى إلى قتل خاصة من وسط فئات الضعيفة جدا. حتى الذين ما جزء كثير من الناس لهسي ما قدروا يطلعوا من المعسكر أفشوك وفاشر.
Ahmed, he said that the complete siege by the RSF on Zamzam and Al-Fashir, it gives a big tax on people that they are still stuck there. Huge violation. They lost a lot of families due to the siege.
زلت سلاح الحصار أو سلاح التجويه الذي استخدمه قوات الدعم السريع ضد المدنيين الأزل من خلال منع مرور قوافل الإنسانية، مما أدت خلفت واقع إنساني مرير جدا. أنا من هنا بناشط القوات، بناشط الجهات الدولية خاصة الأمم المتحدة والمنظمات الدولية تدخل عاجل بخصوص المجاعة وفك حصار فاشر، لأنه هذه السلاح مخالف للقوانين والمنتهك له إنسان.
So he said that the starvation weapon that RSF using by hindering or preventing is preventing humanitarian aid convoys to come into Al-Fashir. It reflects a very bad situation and famine on the ground for the civilians, especially the vulnerable groups, which is mean women and children. And also محمد معلش السلاح بتاع التجويع اللي قلت استخدموه انه انت بتناشد المنظمات الدوليه والمنظمات الدوليه واليو ان، مش كده؟
إيه، لأنه السلاح منتهك للحرب الحصار.
So he directed a message to UN and international agencies to a rapid intervention on the ground due to the very bad situation.
ما يمكن نتوقعه من استمرار هذا السلاح أو الحصار هو الكارثة الإنسانية، ويترتب عليها المجاعة والموت الأجزة والأطفال بسبب الجوع والأمراض سوء التغذية، وفضلا عن موت النيران بتاع مدافع وكده. إضافة للفرد الحصار ده خلف واقع مرير برضه هروب أو الهجرة القسرية للنازحين من أماكنهم الأصلية، مرورا من مناطق برضو يعني للحسي برضو مناطق غير مستقرة زي طويلة والمناطق دي برضو خلف واقع مرير، إضافة لمحلية التينة برضو نفس المجال نفس السلوك برضو ما زالت مستمرة، لأنهم لهسي ما قدروا يعني المنظمات هنا ما قدروا يقدموا لهم الأون الإنساني وكده. وإضافة التوقف المعونة الأمريكية برضو خلف واقع منظمات ما قدر يدخل، حتى الناس حتى اللاجئين القدام في المعسكرات هنا برضو ما زال يعانوا من نفس الوضع المتردي في الخدمات خاصة في الصحة والمياه، وبرضو خلف واقع عزيز كبير جدا.
So he said that this siege reflects a very a bitter reality on the ground, and it affected, as he said, the population on the ground, and the families stuck there, still stuck there. Even for population in Altinaa and Tawila, they couldn't reach the basic needs for them. And also, he also said that the I can explain it out. He can, yeah. He said the population in Altinaa and I'm so sorry. Population in Altinaa and in Al-Tawila, they couldn't, as I said, they couldn't reach the basic needs due to the lack of intervention from the international community, and also the stop or the dismantle of the USID. It's affected their work on the ground, so they couldn't do any kind of activity effectively, and as I said, they can do their rapid response. Yeah, so sorry.
No, that's great. So Hanin, what I'm hearing is we have a situation where it's both a mix of the role of the combatants, but also the lack of the drying up of the stoppages on foreign assistance, making it extremely difficult to respond to the current situation. I mean, to both of you, the ERR, one of the few bright spots of the war in Sudan has been the emergence of the emergency response rooms and the role that civil society has really stepped up to play across the conflict in responding to needs when quite often international aid groups can't get in to do the work. Can you tell us a little bit about like how are ERRs sort of positioning themselves at this stage of the conflict to respond? And given these constraints that Mohamad has been talking about, like what needs to happen to really put the ERRs in a position to do the work that they need to do for the people of Sudan?
Okay. As a grassroots movement, we've sprung up around the country, so we are able to operate in different contexts on the ground. Right now, we are responding in southwest Kordofan, in Al-Nuhud. We are also responding in South Kordofan. We have in Tawila, in Altinaa, in border Chad. We have emergency response room in Khartoum. So as I said, we have ability, and we have different activities on the ground, including including protection and women response rooms, soup kitchens. So this is the basics activities, and we have another activities like rehabilitation of the health centers. We are also operating in the health centers for the health facilities. So this is how emergency response room work. But as you said, as my colleague Mohamad said, that the fund cut affected our work on the ground, so we're unable to operate effectively. I compare that with last year in 2024. We had a localized fund through proximity to humanity. We are able to evacuate more than 3,000 families from Al Jazeera, mass evacuation, and we did it very very quick. But right now, due to the fund cut, we couldn't do that, especially with the conflict in different areas in Darfur, in Kordofan, and Khartoum as well. So we couldn't use the mass evacuation. And also the soup kitchen is affected. So we have a lot of out of 800 soup kitchen in Khartoum are completely dried right now. The same thing in Darfur. So yeah, this is the situation. And also for us as a peaceful movement that we denied the war peacefully. So it's very hard for us if you ask us about democracy right now, we are in 2000 back in 2018, if you ask us about the democracy, we would say that the rights and women rights and those privilege. But right now, the democracy for us, whether to give these people, to give this person a fafa pin, or to give this woman a rape protocol, so it's too hard for us and it's too painful. But we are in a very high level of commitment. As you said, my colleague Mohamad, due to the security concern, and he broke his hand as well, but he's joining because of his very high commitment.
Yeah, thank you. And Mohamad, I can't thank you enough for taking the time to join us today from inside of Darfur. Can I just one quick follow-up question for Mohamad? What are the kind of programs, like give an example of the things that he is trying to do every day that have now stopped because of the aid cuts?
Mohamad,
I ask because we hear a lot that, a lot of like sort of this, some of these aid cuts have been rolled back, that there are now exceptions being made, that some aid should be flowing. Are we seeing that on the ground in Darfur?
محمد بيسألوا من النشاطات اللي انتم بتعملوها كل يوم متعودين تعملوها، وغير كده كيف تأثير المساعدات أو وقف المساعدات الأمريكية وتقليل المساعدات العالمية بدل المساعدات الإنسانية أثر على شغلكم في الأرض.
أول حاجة أهم هسي حاليا في وقت الراهن، طبعا ما زي أيامات الفاتة، لأنه وقت الراهن ده فيها ضغوطات شديدة جدا. احنا بنشتغل في 3 مشاريع رئيسية و4 مشروع فرعي بدعم من أهالي. ال4 المشاريع 3 مشاريع الرئيسية اللي قاعدين نشتغل فيها هي مشروع بتاع مطابخ جماعية في المحطات العامة. مثلا في 2 غرفة 2 مطبخ في مغرفة الإيواء في تينا السودانية، في مطبخ في المعبر، وفي 2 مطبخ في المخر المفوضية هسه نوزع أكل وكده. والنشاط الثاني هي النشاط بتاع توفير المياه سهلة للشرب، لأنه ولا بدأ الصيف وكده، وبرضه التراكم ده حتى محليتنا برضه ما كمحلية ما عنده أبيار جوفية، مشكلة حصول على المياه برضه صعب. لكن لحد هسه شغالين في مشروع إن نوفر 150 برميل مويه يوميا للنازحين، مياه سهلة للشرب. والمشروع الثالث هي مشروع بتاع إجلاء. الجزء من الناس جو بكورينهم لحد هنا، وجزء من العربات العجروم برضو يجيبوا يخلوهم في أبقمرة وفي مناطق القريبة للتينا. احنا بنقول النازحين ده من المحطات ده نجيبوا مخر المفوضية، بعد ذاك المفوضية يعمل لهم إجراءاتهم وبعد ينقلهم للبطاقات المؤقتة ده. أما المشروع الأهالي قاعدين نشتغل فيه هي
محمد
عملنا
دقيقة
تنسيق.
أترجم عشان ما أنسى الكلام يبقى نسيته.
تفضل.
طيب معلش. So basically he said that the situation right now is a little bit difficult for them comparing with past days due to the attacks in Zamzam. So they received more beneficiaries, and they are working in 3 main projects, including the soup kitchen. So they have soup kitchens in Sudanese Tina, and they have soup kitchen in borders with Chad. They have soup kitchens in the commission. The commission is in Chad, right? محمد sorry.
Yes.
المفوضية في Chad مش كده؟
أي البوابة
Okay.
في التشاد والمفوضية في التشاد.
So yeah, so the commission of the humanitarian aid is in Chad. They have also a soup kitchen over there, and they are working to provide water as well because there is no water wells in Altinaa, and they are working also in evacuation to evacuate people from Altinaa. The majority of the people came on foot, so they are evacuating people from Altinaa to من Altinaa بتودوهم وين يا محمد؟
من المناطق اللي حول التينة. ما الناس اللي بيجيبوا ده بيجيبوا برمات بخلوهم في السوق، مرات بخلوهم في مخر بتاع إيواء بتاع استراحة ده. من الاستراحات ده ننقلهم نودوهم مخر المفوضية، وجزء منهم برضه بخلوه في مناطق البرة زي أبقمرة دي برا التينة يعني. هسي حتى التاري ذاته كسر ذاته عربية اللي كان يجيبوه ده للأسف كان عملت حادث كسر العربية.
So yeah, he said that the beneficiaries are being evacuated from Altinaa to places Abgamra, it's outside Altinaa, or to the commission in Chad itself. And in the video, he said also.
That's correct.
Yeah.
So, Hanin, thank you so much. Mohamad, thank you so much for taking the time for joining us today. We really, really appreciate it. And, just stay safe. We really appreciate your contribution. Andre, can I turn to you now and talk a little bit? You were just inside Darfur and then also in the camps in Chad. Could you perhaps offer some reflections about, what you've just heard, but also sort of, in a traditional sort of relief response situation, the international community will be partnering quite closely with organizations like Mohamad's to sort of support their effort. I mean, what does that look like in this current environment? What does the situation inside of Darfur look like to you as someone with a lot of experience in different crises, aid crises? And then we can talk a bit about Chad.
Yeah, no, thank you, Hardin. And thank you, Refugees International, for convening this. I actually had to go off camera a couple of times because I was crying. Like, it is so desperate. It's really hard to encapsulate with just words, but people coming over, having been through what they've been through in Zamzam and Fasher to virtually nothing. UNHCR's budget to date is 9% funded. And there's just nothing on the other side when they get to Tinea, and they stay there for a while, as Mohamad described. There's not enough vehicles to transport them to the camp that they go to. There's not enough shelter. They've managed to erect 520 shelters as of yesterday, but we're talking about 12,500 families or 46,000 people. So people are out in the open, and it's at least 100 degrees in the shade. Really, really difficult circumstances. I saw people fighting for food, and seeing Mohamad. Yeah, I have been doing this for a long time. I don't normally cry, but seeing him and seeing the work that they were doing in bringing food to the people who were sitting in absolute just desert conditions, couldn't move. And they just mobilized this incredible effort. It was nothing short of inspirational in this very bleak context. So yeah, in terms of Tinea and Chad, the Chadians have been incredible hosts, which has been great. They've just allocated a new piece of land. The issue is that to erect a camp costs something around the region of 20 million. UNHCR and its partners, they don't have the funding necessary for plastic, for tents, for water points, for anything. When I'm talking about 9%, I'm talking about $13 to $18 million is what they have, and 20 million for a camp. So they are completely beyond the pale in terms of under-resourced, and I feel that it's not being prioritized to the extent that it should be, given what people who reach there have been through. And I'll just speak for a minute about what people have been through. There's sort of three contexts in Darfur, having just been into Western and Central. One context is in Genena alone, there's 20,000 new households that have come from largely Khartoum, but other areas that have been SAF liberated that are afraid of SAF reprisals or revenge killings. So they're showing up in Darfur, and there's nothing there for them. The NGOs on the ground in Genena, Zilinji, et cetera, are not in a position to expand their caseload. Obviously, they're already having to prioritize. Some of them have not been paid in 3 months. Some of them have been letting staff go. So it's a very tricky situation for them. There's also a moral and ethical issue, given that a lot of these people that are coming are being put into Masalit neighborhoods and Masalit homes. And the Masalit, obviously, were the ones who were chased out of Genena early on in the war at the very beginning. So there's that issue. And then, obviously, the next issue is Fasher itself. There's at least 18 UNICEF trucks parked in Korma, just right north of Fasher, not allowed to go in. The RSF is disallowing any kind of assistance from coming in. This has been 4 months going. And after the killing of the Relief International staff on the 11th, there's virtually no humanitarian assistance from the outside world going in. They're trying to push people out. They say that it's for their safety, and that if aid gets into Fasher, then it will be a stay factor or pull factor, hence disallowing it and pushing people to Tawila. But that's a problem. And then you get to Tawila and other areas like Malit, Korma, but Tawila being the biggest one, 60 kilometers outside of Fasher on the way to Tinea, where Mohamad is. 500,000 internally displaced, 3 major NGOs, IRC, NRC, and Solidarité. And the UN did manage to get a convoy in last week. So they do have access, at least there is access. but it's overwhelming, and the UN is not allowed to stay for longer than 3 to 4 days. 500,000 people. There's no camp management. There's no shelter again. So we get into an issue of people just being outside in 110, 120 degree heat. All sorts of insects. They're malnourished. There are gunshot wounds. MSF is obviously doing a ton, but they can't cover everything. So I think there's different situations in Darfur. Some instances are about access and protection. Some instances are strictly about funding, but funding stretches across the situation in terms of not being enough. Yeah, I'll stop there and take any questions going forward. Thanks.
Thank you, Andrea. Over the last couple of months, there's been a repeated conversation about what happens, where is al-Fashir? How close are we to al-Fashir falling? And what happens if it does? How would you answer those questions now? What's at stake?
I think that the reason that they want to take al-Fashir so badly is that they want to declare this government, and they wanted to do that on April 15th, on the anniversary. And once they take al-Fashir, then they have the entirety of Darfur, and they declare their government. And then we have a situation whereby SAF has some territories and RSF has some territories. And I think it becomes much more difficult to negotiate any kind of peace settlement or even ceasefire at that point. I don't know how far along we are. I think that they did intend to have that happen on the 15th, hence the major attacks in Zamzam on the 11th. What's interesting is with the joint forces, they've really held strong, but they've also made it very hard for people to leave al-Fashir. Not that they're necessarily using people as human shields, but there is some degree of that because they don't want everyone to leave. So it seems like it's going to be a standoff for quite some time, but at some point, yeah. If there were ever a point at which to negotiate peace, this would be it. Like this is the moment where when RSF is hitting Port Sudan twice daily, both sides are not in a great position. This is the moment.
That's great. Thank you. There are more questions about exactly like how many people are left in al-Fashir and what is this going to look like, because we do see the number of people leaving Zamzam making their way to Chad. And then on top of that, with the potential of al-Fashir falling and nothing really on the other side of the border in Chad, it's just devastating to think about how this is going to play out. I mean, even when our teams were in Chad last year, the aid effort was massively underfunded. So to imagine now where what bit that was there has been unplugged, it's just difficult to understand how the government of Chad is going to wrestle with this or how they're going to be able to respond.
No, and they've been incredible. They're in a very, very difficult place because, as anyone who's been to Chad knows, they've got some of the highest malnutrition rates globally already themselves. And what was incredible outside of what I saw with the ERRs, I saw Chadians like bringing food, handing out money to these people because it was such a desperate situation. Yeah, so they've been fantastic, but they need support. And this is when it comes to the US aid cuts. So while PRM is responsible for the refugees, as you know, vis-a-vis the mandate, US aid is responsible for whatever happens in Chad, and the host communities definitely need support. And if the Chadians are going to continue to support this population coming in, they absolutely need and deserve, support.
That's great. Thanks very much, Andrea. So Tom, Andrea teed you up quite nicely there in terms of talking about what's at stake in al-Fashir, the division potentially of the country into two parts, and the need for peace now. You did this job for a number of months in a really tough time. Where are we now in terms of the peace process? If you were still in the job as special envoy, what would you be doing? And what do you think the US government should be doing?
Well, first of all, I mean, every day is a matter of life and death, and every decision, whether that's to increase funding or decrease funding, has lives at stake. And, we have heroes walking amongst us. I mean, when we look at what the ERRs and others are doing, we're talking about life risk every day, certainly comfort risk. And when we think about the totality of the failure, and certainly there's a lot to be said about how the pullback in U.S. funding and diplomacy has made this situation much worse. But this is a total failure. So obviously, first and foremost, we have to look at the RSF having created the famine in the first place as a tactic of war from the beginning, burning fields, killing farmers, raiding stockpiles. Then unfortunately, the SAF and the former NCP officials coming back chose to make starvation a weapon of war a year ago with the note verbal. The decision of the really unconscionable decision by the United Nations Office of the Legal Advisor to basically validate starvation as a weapon of war about this time a year ago, and make it harder even for other groups that did put life-saving first and the Sudanese people first, harder to do their jobs, to the point that while I think we can be proud that the Biden administration was supporting over half of all emergency aid to Sudan at the time, that's not a situation that's sustainable. We need the rest of the world to have been giving more than and before. We need to see more leadership from the African Union and the regional actors and others. So you don't get to this level of human suffering without just a totality of failures across the board from so many corners. Despite that, you have Hanin and Mohamad and others every day raising every penny from mostly the diaspora. And so for those of us on the phone that are in a position to do so, this is like taking every moral philosophy class out of the hypothetical into the real world. That cup of coffee, that $7 goes directly to aid. There are days, and Andrea and others can speak to this, where we will get a commitment of $25,000 and less than 12 hours later, food and water is moving. And we've got to think, when we think about just this latest chapter, when you think about the RSF decision to attack IDP camps, like this is one of the clearest laws of war that goes back centuries across cultures, across religions, that you do not do this sort of thing and unleash this flood of tens of thousands, probably hundreds of thousands. And then you think about the fact that people who were already women and children famished, like on the edge, already in the camps because we weren't getting enough aid, then having to make a week, 2-week, 3-week trek to get to places like Tinea. And then they assume, well, as soon as I get to Tinea, of course, then there'll be water, there'll be food. And there, the international community is not pre-deployed the kind of resources that needed to be done, given what was a predictable level of this with the rainy season coming. So what do we need? We need across the board a completely different scale of response from the standpoint of humanitarian aid to Sudan and attention on Sudan, whether that's all of us in our individual capacities or as governments. And then we see the knock-on effects. Not only did the Trump administration, of course, freeze a lot of aid that was going in, but when the UK was going to step up and cover some of that, then they also cut aid to Ukraine, and then that DFID funding or development funding that was going to go to Sudan again goes to Ukraine. So all of that is to say that we see this complete abdication of diplomatic and moral leadership. You do have great people at the State Department that are working on this and elsewhere. Obviously, then Senator Rubio has said some very important things about Sudan. We've seen the bipartisan consensus. People like Chairman Meeks, folks like Senators Warner and Young that are out there raising attention and putting that pressure on there. But we need to see more of it. I do think this trip is an opportunity, whether that's the stop in the UAE or elsewhere, with the Saudis, who of course have long held one of the primary negotiating paths that are here. So we need to see more attention. We need to see more countries step up in the way that the UK has under Foreign Minister Lammy. We need to see the advocacy community engage more in this. And we need the media to draw more attention to a conflict that does not always fit the neat narratives that make for good headlines. And my sympathy goes out to the reporters who are trying to make this case, but not nearly as much as my sympathy, of course, goes out to those on the ground who've had to walk 21 days through the desert to try to find water for their children, only to find that the international community has not pre-deployed aid to areas that are reasonably permissive for that kind of humanitarian development. So we need to see a lot more attention. We need to see checks written, and we really need to see the U.S. work with the regional actors to find an end to this conflict.
Yeah, and one of the things you just said there about people who are experiencing, they've gone through incredible levels of violence. They are experiencing famine or famine-like conditions, walk days, if not longer, to get into Chad, where we can do an aid operation. We know how to do that. It's a situation where if like the resources were there, you could put the entire relief effort on steroids, and it's just not happening. And that piece, among all the things you've listed, are unconscionable. So if you, Tom, if you were with President Trump now, traveling in the region, what would your messages be to diplomatic actors in the region, to the regional partners, about what needs to happen to improve the situation inside of Sudan?
Well, I mean, I think that if Donald Trump wants to continue to build a track record of being the ultimate deal maker, there's a clear deal to be made on Sudan, in the sense that the Sudanese people are very clear about simply wanting to get back to the path they were on in 2019. That kind of a civilian unity government gets us out of a zero-sum game. I think even those who are fairly sympathetic to the SAF understand that the army isn't calling the shots politically on the governing side right now. And you see Sudan, the Sudanese people, being increasingly forced to choose between the two most hated institutions in the country, the RSF and the NCP, the former Bashir officials. And everyone else in between, I think, wants that peace, wants to see a national unity government in place. And many of the regional actors, even those who have backed one side or another, I think, stand to benefit from that idea of a civilian unity government. So the deal is in place that can be done. Similarly, while the way that Doge has gone about the cuts have been horrific, and as Bill Gates has noted, children are dying because of it, you will not find anyone working on Sudan who wouldn't be the first to champion the idea of reimagining a more streamlined and efficient way to do aid. And the mutual aid programs that several people have spoken to is that. We're talking about going from big aid and Beltway bandits and that kind of discourse to a mutual aid approach that is incredibly efficient. We couldn't do it because we would never ask people to take the physical risk. It would be immoral for us to do so, but it's even more immoral when Sudanese are taking those physical risks to get things to the hardest hit areas, not to find a way to get more aid going in that direction. We certainly started to do that, I think, too slowly by my standards, but fast by government standards, to move a bigger percentage. But as you've said, Hardin, we've gotten those percentages up to 60%, 70% mutual aid support in Ukraine. When I was on the ground early in the war in Ukraine, you saw similar kind of innovation, creativity, and courage. But for lots of reasons, including race, we haven't seen the same kind of shift in confidence to saying, well, we trust the Sudanese to deliver in that way. So here's a great opportunity. If you want to be the one that shows you're not just in it for the pain and the cruelty of denying food and medicine to the most vulnerable, but instead want to show you're the champion of a new and better way to do it, Sudan can be exhibit A in that. You can save a lot of lives on the humanitarian side, and through the ceasefire efforts. And we will see what emerges from that. But the opportunity is clearly there, particularly in working with some of the regional actors that are already engaged with on other matters.
Yeah, and it puts a really sharp point on the fact that with so little money actually being thrown at this crisis at this stage, A, that's unconscionable and we need to fix it. But B, we actually now know how real aid, more efficient aid gets in. Right? It's through the courage of the people who have just been on this call joining from Sudan, and they do it really well. And the real question is, we have buckets of money that's still in the international system that's there that we could reorient and repurpose to get to these organizations as fast as possible. And I think that's kind of on all of us collectively as an aid community to support that effort and to really try to supercharge what they're doing on the ground.
Again, I think this is a case where we don't want to assume that one size fits all. We want to have the kind of entrepreneurship that it says, what is the particular situation in Sudan? And I think you have both on the positive side, this incredible innovation, creativity, tech savviness, and physical courage on the mutual aid side. And unfortunately, you see on both the SAF, former NCP side, and the RSF side, actors who know how to play the international community in the old rules in a way that not only meant that the United Nations was aggravating the famine last year, but was actually taking sides not just between SAF and RSF, but often taking sides with the more NCP and extremist elements inside the SAF, which is part of what we were able to break with the ALPS negotiations, and some of that's held. So I think the mutual aid approach is one that clearly works here in Sudan, probably works more generally as an approach going forward, because some of the logic that kept the old bipartisan aid consensus hasn't held. And I think we are in a generational shift of what that looks like going forward, which is a broader conversation in Sudan. But in the Sudan case, I think it's clear, both in how the U.S. can support it. There's a lot of bipartisan support on the Hill still, but also all of us as citizens. It makes it that if you can raise $500 from your local church, that can run an ER, that can run a local kitchen, that can save lives. So much to be done here, and it's certainly the Sudanese people are doing their part, and I think we need to see a lot more from the rest of us.
Thank you very much. I couldn't agree more. Dan, can I turn over to you now to talk a little bit about so what you have seen when you have been in the region, on the ground, a number of these different countries, but also like the role that regional actors are playing? Because I remember the early months of the conflict, one of the big concerns was how do we kind of keep the region out, right? How do we avoid the externalization, the regionalization of the conflict? Because that, as we've seen in a number of environments from Syria, across the Middle East and Africa, tends to supercharge the suffering of the people. Where are we now with that, and what do we need to be doing going forward?
Yeah, thanks, Hardin. First, let me just underscore, what some of the previous speakers said about just the level of displacement, the largest displacement humanitarian crisis in the world, both inside Sudan and in countries surrounding, and the real need, the effects that cutting off aid has had on programs, even where there's, exceptions for life-saving aid. We're hearing from partners on the ground how that aid isn't getting going, or it's being delayed and taking a while to get in, and that is taking the legs out from some of these really great efforts by the emergency response rooms and other mutual aid groups. More than 70% of the communal kitchens being shut down because of this loss of aid. There's a lot more that could be done to support that. But yeah, as you mentioned at the beginning, I've had the opportunity over the last couple of years to travel to several countries where, in places where Sudanese have been displaced, including Chad, South Sudan, Egypt, and then into the Nuba Mountains in Sudan. And even, before this latest round of displacement, we saw that there was, and before the latest cuts, it was already, the response was under-resourced. So just really underscores the need. We're talking about in Chad, upwards of 800,000 people newly arrived since the war started 2 years ago. South Sudan, more than 1.1 million. In Egypt, estimates of 1.5 million Sudanese who've been displaced, and there's several other countries as well. So one thing is just recognizing that where there is an ability to get aid, and where there can be real refuge, that needs to be underscored, and not there's dangers of, and we've heard reports, particularly from Egypt, of people being forced back into Sudan where it's not safe. So that, just wanted to highlight that, it underscores that this really is a conflict that's affecting the entire region, and that kind of brings me and beyond, because there's been a big role of external actors in fueling the conflict, and that includes Egypt, Iran, Turkey, Saudi Arabia, and the UAE, each supporting different sides. But one thing that we've really been focused on is the role of the UAE, and I think it's really poignant today with President Trump traveling there. It's been the most egregious level of support for the RSF, which the United States has found responsible for genocide. That was something that Secretary Rubio repeated in his confirmation hearings, and outright saying that the UAE is supporting this. So this is something that's been covered by many independent journalists, human rights groups. The UN panel of experts found this credible, that the UAE is supplying weapons to the RSF, which is committing genocide. So one big part is making sure that that is known, that there's pressure felt by the UAE and other external actors for their negative role that they're playing, and really urging them to use the leverage they have to stop the atrocities that are happening now. And I'll just quickly just mention some of the efforts that us and partners have been trying to do to shine a light on that. We've been engaging with we've engaged with the NBA and its role in having a partnership with the UAE. Have reached out to people like Trevor Noah, the comedian who recently had a show in the UAE, and many may have seen the news that Disney just announced they're going to build a theme park in the UAE. So I think just trying to spread the awareness of what the negative role that the UAE is playing. And then, it was discouraging to see, though not completely surprising, that the Trump administration has informed Congress about its proposal for upwards of $1.4 billion in arms sales to the UAE. But it was encouraging to see members of Congress, particularly Congressman Meeks, come back with a statement saying that he plans to block try to block those trades because of the role that the UAE is playing in Sudan, and to introduce a joint resolution of disapproval. So I think in terms of what people listening on this call, one immediate thing that people can do is get a hold of your member of Congress and encourage them to take a stand on this, on making sure that no arms are supplied to the UAE until it stops supplying arms to the RSF, which is committing genocide. And then beyond that, there's other efforts going on with Congress that were mentioned earlier, of pushing for an arms embargo and pushing for the appointment of a special envoy and more attention to Sudan. So yeah, and then more generally, as was already mentioned here, and I think is very clear from the previous speakers, is the need to get aid in there and to support the local groups that are really at the forefront of this. So yeah, I'll just end there by saying, the need for that aid and local support, and the need for attention on the role of external actors and what people can do to make sure that members of Congress are aware of that and taking action.
Yeah, and thank you very much. That was a great overview of the challenges that the region had brought into the conflict and the kind of steps that need to be taken to get us to a much more productive level of engagement across the region. And I'm going to turn now to some of the questions that we've had in the chat from the audience. And this one leads quite nicely out of that last observation. So Nicole Wittersheim from Human Rights Watch has asked whether or not there's a bigger role for example, Gulf and other donors in the region to pivot in and do more in terms of humanitarian assistance, or pull back a bit from some of the roles they may be playing, and then really lean in to elements or components of humanitarian aid that they've engaged on in the region in the past. Tom, what are your thoughts on that in terms of like the sort of the intersection of humanitarian aid and diplomacy in the region, and how the two can be complementary?
I think that I guess the positive answer about how they can reinforce each other is that we are so far below the level of attention and funding that's required on both the humanitarian and the diplomatic side, that really almost anything that we can do will be beneficial in terms of raising more attention and awareness and creating more pressure, certainly more resources going in on the humanitarian side. But there are complexities. I think that there are, it is important for all countries to step up and give more aid to Sudan. I think in the case of the UAE and others, it is so clearly better if that is going through existing respected channels, whether that's a World Food Program or Norwegian Refugee Council, or directly through mutual aid efforts. because there is valid reason for concern about dual use, and that the laws of the humanitarian laws and laws of war have not been respected by the RSF or other actors. So I think that it is a time where people in Sudan are desperate for aid, and so aid is a good thing. It's not just money. Obviously, Starlink has been a life-saving effort. We tried to work with them in the Biden administration to get the balance right of their concerns about liability, because everyone knew that was also being used abusively, particularly by the RSF. So we need to have telecom up, we need to have dams protected, et cetera. But at the end of the day, I think that the external actors who have either been playing a very serious role or a more marginal role together need to understand that, quite frankly, and the Egyptians speak about this often, they're paying a much bigger price in the US. The strategic cost to Egypt is much more real and present. I do believe there are deep strategic issues for the United States about whether that's the Red Sea access, whether it's the fact that bin Laden spent 7 years building al-Qaeda under the NCP era, whether it's instability across the Sahel from where this could go, even leaving aside the humanitarian issues. But it's nothing compared to Egypt having to take, millions of refugees across the border, about understanding how instability in the region or a Russian base would affect things in the long term. Saudis, the same thing, who took on a significant amount of refugees in the initial era as well. Those countries, I think, can bring some of the actors together. One of the challenges diplomatically is the fact that it is a two-sided war, but it's not really a two-sided diplomatic negotiation, because everybody understands that the SAF side may be fighting as SAF or SAF and affiliated militias, but the actual kind of political control in the coalition is much more complicated. And the former Bashir officials in the NCP have clearly used the war itself as a way to get back to power that the Sudanese people would not otherwise support. And one of the questions also pointed to the fact, and I'll wind this up, that, in the initial period of the war, it was easy to say that pretty much everybody benefited from peace, both in Sudan and in the region. As happens in the second year of a war, now in the third year of a war, there are people profiteering, and that includes some of the key actors in the SAF coalition who are profiting directly from the war in various ways and wanted to continue financially benefiting. There are those who are benefiting politically by seeing it as a backdoor to power, and those people want the war to continue. And so what needs to happen, I think, is not just diplomatic engagement, but engaging with the people who are trying to get to peace, and empowering the people who are trying to get to peace, and marginalizing those actors who are determined to let this war continue. I think from the Saudis to the Emiratis to the Egyptians, the Europeans, the United States, we know who those actors are, not just inside the two fighting sides and their aligned militias, but beyond that. And I think that's a key going forward.
Thank you. Andrew, quick question for you. One of the questions in the chat or before referred to what role can we actually expect from the U.S. government? Oh, I'm sorry, Hanin, let me turn to you. Do you have a comment on that?
Yeah, I just have a comment on what Tom said, that NCBs not only want to benefit from the war, they also want to benefit from the emergency response room, because a week ago we received an order from the governor of Khartoum that he needs to stop all the emergency response room and the soup kitchens related to us. But suddenly we got the social media post that NCBs are denied this order, and they want to the emergency response room to still operate, and which is kind of exploitation of our power on the ground, and they want to control us, unfortunately, but they can't.
And part of this may very well be an understanding on the part of some of the belligerents of the role that the ERRs play in terms of their support and where they emerged from, and the importance they could play in the future civil society, in the future of a Sudan that would be under civilian control. How do you all think, Hanin, about that, about the role that you're playing in terms of emergency response now, but also remaining sort of the backbone of civil society inside of Sudan, and what that means for the future of Sudan?
Okay, so I think we are playing a great role now on the ground, in terms of humanitarian. Also, we have kind of call for change because we are also having kind of awareness sessions that we are holding, and we are preparing ourselves for the day after. After war, of course, we have a lot of role, and we see ourselves also on the table of the negotiation as a civil society control power on the ground right now. And even in some places, especially the places controlled by RSF, we are the only actor able to work and serve civilians in this hard situation.
An incredibly important point, and one that's often missed, that when you are localizing a response and working through local and national civil society, you're actually strengthening the fabric of the country and the society, right? By the effort, you're getting 2 for 1 on the effort. Not only doing aid better, but you're playing a really important role in terms of strengthening society. And that doesn't happen when the money is absorbed by the international aid community solely.
Yes, this is actually, sorry. This is LCC model, which is the Localization Coordination Council with international community organization, ACTID, Proximity Humanity, Save the World, and other organization, and also the local actors and emergency response room. So we have, and as you said, localize the fund, and also we are aiming to reshaping the international humanitarian aid landscape with new policies and new ideas. It's jamming with the situation on the grounds. Yeah.
Tom?
I think you were going to go to Andrea first, so I can come back later.
Okay, great. So Andrea, just quickly, there's a question in the chat about, what the U.S. government can actually do at this stage with respect to humanitarian assistance, given what's happened to USAID, to some of these bureaucratic tools that have been sort of put through the wood chipper, for want of a better phrase. Are we in a stage now where the capacity of the U.S. government, if they were to turn this stuff back on, given your time and experience inside of USAID, where that's just going to be really difficult? Or are we in a place where we could flip some switches, move some money, and actually see the kind of difference on the ground that Tom was talking about when you actually give that money to an ERR, and how fast, within 12 hours, that money shows up in people's assistance?
No, I don't think, I mean, it is in the late stages of the dismantling. Like, one of the things that I would advocate for tomorrow would be to take the NFIs that BHA has stored in Pisa and Dubai and whatever, and to fly them over to Adre sort of right away. But other than that, I don't think it's a matter of being able to restore it. And I think my bigger concern is that while there were waivers for Sudan, and while it took 3 months to get payments through, etc., the next period is going to be even worse. There's no budget for Sudan going forward. All of this stuff going to State Department, no offense, it's absolutely impossible. It's not going to work. So no, unfortunately, Hardin, I do not have a positive answer on that.
I think that's a very powerful point, and the fact that we've seen that what we're experiencing right now in terms of the unplug of foreign assistance in Chad and in Darfur and other parts of Sudan, this is just like this is a presage of what's going to come, right? Because now the way in which the budget is being worked, and the way in which what we're seeing for assistance budgets moving forward, and with the kind of capacity that's been unplugged from AID, it's really, really difficult to see how we do this sort of thing going forward. And you look at the response in other parts of the country, in other parts of the world, like in Myanmar, et cetera, to the earthquake, where we just weren't present, we didn't really show up. And we see that now on a global stage, particularly this is the world's biggest humanitarian crisis. Like, this is the center of gravity. And the US has basically walked off the field. Dan?
Yeah.
Sorry, go ahead.
A few months to look back on this is a good time. I mean, from assistance perspective, yeah.
Well, and if I can come in on that, I mean, I think this is where understanding the way in which the cuts to the non-life-saving parts matter. The OTI type funding that supported a lot of the civilian efforts. The whole breakthrough here, as several people have noted, is if you can get out of the zero-sum game, the obvious way to do it would be if you could give the people of Sudan some vote, this war would be over tomorrow. But then you have the process questions of exactly how does that form. But that's where groups, cutting off groups like USIP, right? Doing some of the most important convening of both diaspora and local voices, support for the OTI type programs. That's really, when you think about it, and as someone who was on the Hill, like when I think about the things that really gets Republicans as well as Democrats excited, it's those people that are risking their lives for freedom, risking their lives for their people. That's exactly the people that are being cut off the most in this situation. And to Hanin's point, a lot of this does go back to, the false dichotomy of who's worth the RSF or the SAF. And everyone can say, of course, it's the RSF, except for the fact that SAF created the RSF. And the war itself was about the two of them colluding to prevent the power from, going to the people, which goes back to the idea that in many ways, the response rooms are the antithesis of the old Bashir approach, which was play groups against each other, have power at the center, mutual aid is about inclusive across ethnicity, across age, across generation, coming together to solve problems for the people. And so I think that is still this choice, is that you have fightings that are between, these two sides, but the real fight is over this question of who gets to control the future of Sudan. And that's where standing with the Sudanese people and supporting those efforts, both from the US and otherwise that do that, are the key to helping to tee up that peace, and undermining it is, of course, the exact opposite of that.
Well, thank you. So we're at time. And what I'd like to do is a quick lightning round of any final comments. Dan, I'll go to you first, and then Andrea, and then Tom. And then I really want to give the final word to Hanin and Mohamad in terms of like any sort of last messages that they'd like to share with the community before this ends. Dan?
Yeah, thanks, Hardin. Just to add urgency to what was just said, we're looking at the rainy season starting, which will make it more difficult to deliver aid, and that people who are involved with the operational side of things are very worried about the pipeline already being backed up and practically broken. So just adding that to the urgency. And I'll just end with like another plug on just for people to speak out on Sudan, on the role of the UAE, on what's going on. And you can go to speakoutонsudan.org, where you can find there's a video that's narrated by the actor Don Cheadle about the role that the UAE is playing. And again, to take that action to contact your members of Congress to urge them to act on Sudan. Thanks.
Thanks, Dan. Andrea?
Yeah, rainy season, big issue. Unaccompanied minors, over 700 already. That is going to be a huge issue, and no one is really grappling with it. And since Dan plugged, I'm going to plug mutualaidsudan.org. We are raising money for the emergency response rooms. We get it to them within 2 weeks' time at less than 5% overhead, and it works. So thanks for the opportunity, guys.
Awesome. Thank you. Tom?
No excuses on not writing a check yourself, raising a check. Mutual Aid Sudan is a great place to give it. It goes straight through, as straight as you're going to get. There are many other important efforts. Really appreciate Refugee International, others on the call, Human Rights Watch, and others who have continued to try to shine a light on this, and those in the media that are trying. What I would say again is that the rainy season is going to make all of this worse, but it's already at a breaking point. The only reason it's not breaking all of our hearts every day is that we don't see it. And I do think diplomatically, we need to keep pushing the United States, both the bipartisan consensus on the Hill and the Trump administration, to do this. I think what will make that easier is if others kind of get the deal 85% of the way there, and the Trump administration can help close. So it's not all on the United States, particularly right now, given the dynamics that are at play. It is a time to see the AU or African leadership, the GCC play a role, others, and I think many do want to see that. So my hope is we will see some sort of a regional sense of urgency getting to an outcome here, while others can support that. Thank you.
But certainly hope that that's in the president's agenda. He's in the Middle East this week. Hanin, let me just turn it over to you, like to sort of, for you and Mohamad, sort of close us out here. What are the core messages that you want to leave with the audience?
Okay, محمد، الرسالة الأساسية اللي عايز توريها للمستمعين الموجودين هنا. جمهور.
سامي هاي. أول حاجة شكرا للفرصة لكل المستمعين وكل الناس اللي بيقدم الأول للإنسان. كإثارة إتاب كده في الأخير، أنا شايف إنه مسؤولية بتاع مساعدات وقصة الفتي المعونة الأمريكية ده مسؤولية أخلاقية. الناس مفروض كلها تتضامن عشان البعثات اللي هنا ده مأساة كبيرة جدا. المفروض الناس توحد الجهود وتمشي في اتجاه إنها توحد البتاع دي وتقدم اليد الأول. الفكرة بتاع غرفة الطوارئ أو الرسالة بتاع غرفة الطوارئ هو دي الماني إن الناس كلها تتكاتف في اتجاه ده عشان نقدر نقدم ضد الأون. وشكرا لكل الناس، خاصة الأستاذة إندريا قبل فترة جات هنا وقدمت يد الأون وقدرت تساعد وقدرت تعكس صوت وقدرت تعكس برضه حياتنا للعالم وكده. وده في الأخير شكرا. تصدق.
He thanks all of you, the audience, and for the Refugee International for making this platform. And he also said that it's the responsibility of reoperating the USAID become an ethical responsibility for all of us. He also thanks Andrea very much that she came and helped them a lot, and she amplified our voices. Our voices, all of us at the Emergency Response Room. And he said that we should work, all of us, in a kind of solidarity, which is the main idea of the Emergency Response Room, to deliver aid to the people who are in the worst situation right now on the ground. And for me, I don't want to echo what all you said, but I want to say that for the new administration, to unlock the aid, to pay attention to Sudan, to Sudanese people on the ground. I know sometimes people think differently according to their own businesses, but at the end of the day, even the countries that they think that it's rich right now, Sudan is more richer than those countries. Sudan have a very good resources in terms of human resources and natural resources, and we have a good geographical area which is affected all the countries across the region. So if we pay attention to Sudan, we are technically make a peace in different areas of other African countries. Thank you.
Thank you, Hanin and Mohamad. I can't think of a better way to close this webinar. A huge thanks to the audience for joining us. We really appreciate your time. And tremendous thanks to panelists for sharing your insights with us. And just an incredible shout out to Hanin and Mohamad. Thank you so much for joining from Inside. It's really special, and we're honored that you were with us today. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Hardin. Thanks, Refugees International.
Thanks, Andy.